oftentimes with college hoops, come tournament time, there are just coaches you get comfortable betting on, and there are coaches you're comfortable fading. I know number one on both of our lists is going to be the same guy, and that's Tom Izzo. Bottom line, Izzo at Michigan State, 26 seasons. He just gets more out of the players. I mean, if you put it this way, if you joined Michigan State, if you joined the program and you stayed for all 4 years, you've made a Final Four. That's across his career, you've made a Final Four. He's made the tournament, Izzo, 24 straight years. He's 48-20 overall, champion in 2000. He's got 8 Final Four appearances, which is ridiculous. 2019, he lost in the final. To me, it's if we're betting on a coach and a coach that gets the most, they're not always highly seeded like you think of a Kansas and you think of a Duke, you think of a Kentucky. Izzo's at the top of my list as far as coaches I bet on.
I would completely agree with you. And you think back on it with Michigan State, the last big time recruit, in my opinion, that they had was Jason Richardson. And you're going back to that's the 2000 national championship team with him and Zach Randolph. Randolph, probably because he came in a year afterwards, actually, might have been a big same classification. But he has not gotten that 5-star kind of guy. Denzel Valentine, Draymond Green, these are guys that develop within the program. You got to give him a ton of credit for the guys staying and then developing them into pros.
You know, it's funny you say that because he was actually a better recruiter early on in his tenure at Michigan State because Flint was so fertile at the time. Mateen Cleaves and his friends and others, Flint was such a fertile basketball ground for high school players that Tom Izzo owned the city of Flint. They all went to East Lansing. It's kind of dried up a little bit there in Michigan, in Flint, Michigan. The recruiting hasn't been as good. But again, he's the type of dude, you send a player to Michigan State, he's going to get the most out of them.
No question about it, and it's been proven over time. You mentioned the Flintstones, Mateen Cleaves, Charlie Bell, and, of course, Mo Pete. And I think you see that across the board in football and in basketball. You look in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, the number of players that are there that once were there in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, Patrick, I just think the well has gone dry. And you've seen such an influx to the Atlanta area throughout the southeastern United States.
Let's ping pong a little bit. You go next. Okay. We both said Izzo. Yep. Who's your next that you like to bet on them all?
You know, for me, one of the guys that I really like on this list is Kelvin Sampson. I think Kelvin Sampson does an immense job of getting the best out of his talent. When you look at it, this is a team that's looking to make its third straight Elite Eight. This is not even in a Power 5 league. I think the American's a very good conference. I would consider them among the top 8 conferences, but what he's able to do, finally he's got a couple pros in Sasser and Walker, but in the past they have not had that, and Kelvin Sampson really maximizes his talent in terms of what he brings into Houston.
Good one. Love Sampson. Great coach. Went to the NBA as well, came back, doing it again. By the way, you know he is 67. So Jay Wright retired at 60. Yeah. Coach K's gone. Roy Williams is gone. Boeheim just retired. Izzo's 67. Barnes is 68. Pitino's 70. Larranaga's 73. Huggins is 69. Leonard Hamilton's 74. What am I saying? All these coaches that we kind of grew up on over the last few decades, they're all in their twilight now.
They are, but I'll tell you what, Kelvin Sampson's got a good thing going at Houston. They're going to move to the Big 12. I said about 6 months ago, I said, if you could buy stock in any university, U of H would be the program. You got the football program and the basketball program moving in there. You've got that big money donor like Nike does with Phil Knight. You've got that with Tillman Fertitta at the University of Houston. This is a fertile recruiting ground for football and the state of Texas for basketball. You mentioned Larranaga at 73. Jim Larranaga, to me, is in such a great situation down in Miami. There's not a lot of pressure with the basketball program. The expectation is, hey, if you make the tournament, great. You do well, even better. But, you know, it's a great place to live down there in Coral Gables. And then on top of it, the success that he's been able to have, you saw the transfer of Nigel Pack. You saw what Isaiah Wong's been able to do. I think it's going to be just easier. My thing is, if I'm University of Miami, I would bring in every recruit in December and January to UM basketball and say, my God, do you want to go to school here or would you like to go to school in East Lansing? Good luck.
Bring our guy, part of the network and Miami alum, Chris Felica, the Bear, with you to help recruit. Okay, because he's got all that cash from Fox now. A guy that I'm going to bet on, I know you're going to totally disagree with, it's Bill Self. Sorry, I know the narrative is he lacks success with a ton of talent. And yes, he's had a lot of bad losses in the first weekend in the tournament. But digging through his resume a little bit, you mentioned it during the break, that second championship kind of separates him a little bit now. Roy Williams had 3. Bob Knight had 3. Dean Smith had 2. Yep. Calipari's just got the 1. Bill Self has got the 2. 2020, the season got shut down. He probably had the best team in college basketball. And how about at Tulsa? He goes to the Elite 8, flips that to the Illinois job. Self. He goes to an Elite 8 and Sweet 16 in 3 years at Illinois. 17 Big 12 regular season titles in 20 years at Kansas. And I mentioned the 2 tournaments, a runner-up in 2012, 4 Final Fours, 5 Elite 8s for Self. He's starting to become a bet-on guy for me.
Well, I get where you're coming from. My only argument against him is in the tournament a little bit because he's had 4 Final Fours when he's had teams that every year are basically a top 4 seed. But to me, when you look at the entire body of work, it speaks for itself. His greatness can't be discounted. He's got more he's got more seasons coached than he does home losses at KU. I mean, this guy's unbelievable.
Your third is Eric Musselman.
Yeah.
Why? You're going to bet on him.
The Muss Bus is unbelievable. Some of these guys have NBA pedigree. You mentioned Sampson having spent some time with the NBA as well. There's just an understanding. They will run the same play until you stop it. To me, where Izzo, Musselman, and Sampson really make hay is when you go from that Thursday to Saturday or Friday to Sunday, that 48-hour turnaround. I feel like they're as good as almost anybody out there, and that's the difference for me with those guys.
Okay, I'm going to throw you a curveball for my third that I bet on, and it's Mick Cronin. Nobody saw this one coming, but again, made the tournament year after year at Cincinnati. His 3 seasons at UCLA, first off, he returned a historic program in UCLA to its rightful place. I think we can all agree there. He wasn't the first choice at UCLA as their next head coach, but 3 seasons, his first season, COVID, so no postseason, and probably the following year, Amal Shaw, he goes to the Final Four, and then last year, a Sweet 16 run. This year, we wouldn't be surprised if he's cutting down the nets. Cronin, all of a sudden, defensive-minded, not a fun brand of basketball, all of a sudden a guy I'm betting on come tournament time.
Well, it's funny. I sent Dustin 4 names on this list, and Cronin was my other guy, and he goes, you got to remove one of the – yeah. And I said, he goes, you got to remove one of the guys. I think Mick's a tremendous coach. I mean, when you look at talent-wise, there are 2 teams in the Pac-12 that are more talented than UCLA. Oregon and Arizona are more talented, but UCLA is the better coach team, and I think that's the difference. They play discipline, and his guys buy into what he's selling, so you got to give him a ton of credit. And also, just to kind of substantiate the point on Larranaga, Dustin, I know you've had some stats here in terms of Miami's draws in the NCAA tournament. I don't want to say how unfair they've been, but they've been tough.
I mean, last year they lost to the national champ in Kansas. 2018 lost to Loyola Chicago, who went to the Final Four. 17 went down to Michigan State, who had Cassius Winston, Nick Ward, and Miles Bridges. 2016 lost to Villanova, who won it all. And then his best team was 2012-13. That was Kenny Kaji, Shane Larkin, Duran Scott. They lost to a Vander Blue-led Marquette squad. Not a tough draw. They probably should have beaten that team. But the rest of them, really tough matchups for the Canes.
Larranaga took George Mason to the Final Four. Full stop.
Jai Lewis, stand up.
Your point about Cronin, those vets, they stuck around. They didn't transfer.
Exactly.
Like, he's known as a prickly guy, but his players love him. I think he's going to build something special here in Los Angeles at UCLA. Okay, the fun part's next. Coaches we fade, tournament time, sharp money. So we're having some fun, and kudos to Dustin. Great idea. Coaches we like to bet on. The Muss Bus, Izzo, and Kelvin Sampson for Amal Shaw. My 3 were Bill Self, and I'll go more into the Bill Self potential legacy because I think he can catch Coach K on all-time wins. He's never going to catch Wooden with the 10 titles. Mine were Izzo, bet on. Cronin was my curveball, and then Bill Self. Now let's talk about the coaches we fade. I'm going to let you start, Amal Shaw. Start with a coach that you like to bet against come tournament time.
Well, I'm going to take the number 1 answer on the board. We'll go with Rick Barnes.
No, but you can't do that. You killed me last week for saying I fade Barnes come tournament time, and now he's number 1 on your list.
Hold on a second. Once again, you're going to make me be a public defender for somebody. I never said Rick Barnes is a great coach. I said Rick Barnes is a great guy.
That's fair. You did say that. You're right.
Yeah. So, you know what? He's a very nice guy. Great guy to cover if you've covered some of these teams, right? There's certain, you know what I hate, and it's just human nature. There's certain coaches that I like because they were cordial and they were respectful and they were nice when you covered them or when I covered. And then there are guys you don't like because of that same reason. That's why and you said it, I don't know if you said it on air or off air. You go, I know you're a Popovich guy. I'm like, he's a great guy. He just doesn't want to be asked stupid questions. If you ask an intelligent question, he gives you an intelligent answer. I just think Rick Barnes, though, hasn't gotten it done. And some of the criticism has been warranted. You go back to that team when he had, I think it was 02 maybe, with TJ Ford. They had an opportunity. They got to the Final Four, but TJ Ford was the best point guard, best player in college that year. They couldn't do much once they got to the Final Four.
Rick Barnes, Providence, Clemson, Texas, and now Tennessee. Amal Shaw, 37 years, 12 exits in the round of 64, 7 in the round of 32, 4 total Sweet 16s in 37 seasons, 2 Elite Eights, 22 and 23 overall. He's a disaster come tournament time. I'm a great guy.
I'm an optimist. That's a better than 10% success rate of getting to the Sweet 16.
But I'm just like you. I'm just like you. I'm so impressionable. We'll have interviewed somebody, and then I pull for the person.
Yeah.
You talk badly about somebody, you meet them in person, they're so kind to you. Your friends, you like them for the rest of your life. And Barnes is the same way. I've interviewed him as well. Couldn't be, nice Christian, really sweet man.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, 37 years, 4 total Sweet 16s, and 12 exits in the round of 64 with some very good teams at Texas.
Yeah, you and I are both on the same page here, but I want you to give one that you've got on your list, and I completely forgot about this guy. And to be honest with you, if Rick Barnes is 1, this guy to me should be 1B on the list.
Well, I have to tell you who my number 1 is before we get to good tease. Fran McCaffrey is my number 1. He's had tremendous teams. Remember, last year, McCaffrey and Iowa ran through the Big Ten Conference and lost in the first round. 2 years ago, he had Garza, lost in the second round. He's a jerk. Not to mention, he's just a bad dude, McCaffrey, or seemingly is a bad dude. He's 6-11 overall in the tournament. McCaffrey at the top of my list. You okay with that?
I am great with this one, and I thought this was a pretty good one. This was not the one I had you slated for as my 1B, but I completely forgot about your other guy. But I agree with you, Fran McCaffrey. And, to your point, it's the disposition. It's his demeanor.
Yes.
That's one of the things, right? Like, to me, Bill Self, I always thought D. Brown summarized it beautifully with the difference between Bruce Weber and Bill Self. He goes, because remember, they were both at Illinois. Bruce Weber led him to the national runner-up against North Carolina. He goes, Bill Self was the kind of guy who comes up, puts your arm around you, says, hey, how's your girlfriend doing? He cared about his players. Bruce Weber is like, hey, come to Kansas State. You can average 9 points a game.
I'll give you your tease. I'll pay it off. It's Matt Painter. Yeah. 17 years at Purdue, 6 Sweet 16s, just 1 Elite 8 appearance. Had some very good basketball players. McCaffrey, by the way, has had a lot of studs at Iowa and done nothing in the tournament. Painter's had some very good basketball players. 17 years, 6 Sweet 16s, 1 Elite 8. He's on my list of coaches to fade.
I like that one a lot, and I think this is what's holding everybody from betting Purdue in this tournament. Zach Edey's been the National Player of the Year, or should be at the end of the season. He's been tremendous, but this team has not been as consistent from the perimeter as we're used to seeing in the past. But I think it's the Matt Painter factor. Last year, to me, was it last year when they lost to Texas in the tournament, and then the previous year was to, I think, North Texas? You had the best player.
You have a savant like mine for that. You're probably right.
Well, thank you. But, to me, you had the best player on the floor in Jaden Ivey. I know you were a big fan of Jaden Ivey coming in the draft. I was a big fan. To me, when I look at this team, I'm like, come on, man. How are you not winning with a talent like this every time?
Totally agree. My 3, Painter, McCaffrey, and Barnes. Your 3rd. I know you have Barnes on your list. Who else you got?
I got Mark Few up at Gonzaga. I think the talent that they've had has not necessarily lived up to what they, I go back to the kid who transferred from San Jose State, plays for the Memphis Grizzlies right now in the NBA, Brandon Clark.
Yes.
Tremendous shot blocker, tremendous team. I think that was Rui Hachimura as well on that team. I could be wrong. But to me, I looked at that and I go, that team should have been a Final Four team. The team a couple years ago, I thought they got a bad call when they had Nigel Williams-Goss at the point against Carolina, but a team that could have won a national title. Jalen Suggs and company. They played a great, great Baylor team. I don't think Drew got enough credit for how good that Baylor team was when you look at that backcourt and what they were able to do. But I felt like they should have at some point in time won a national title by now, or should have had more at least Final Four appearances.
Don't disagree. I love your 3rd. Has this guy had some talent? John Calipari.
Well, I'm a big John Cal fan as a person. Great guy, genuinely cares for his players.
You love everyone as a person.
That's not true. We could talk about Jim Boeheim for the next 2 hours if you want. We can talk about the Rats. We can talk about the Rats for the rest of the week.
You love every coach you hate.
What are you talking about?
You've said that they're a good person about every single one.
I never said that about the rodent. I'm going to tell you right now, he's not a good person. He's a straight-up jerk. There's no denying. There's no sugarcoating that. John Calipari, I'm telling you right now, He's a guy that genuinely cares for his guys. If he's a top 5 guy, he's like, you got to go. You can't come back here. You got to go. He has the best interest of his players at heart. That's not what the Rat does.
So he's on your list, then why?
Because his teams have failed based on the talent that they've had. Think about that game against Wisconsin. You know, Wisconsin ends up losing when Grayson Allen hits that big 3-point shot down 9 against Wisconsin in the national title game, but that was a title that they could have won. The funny thing was, we knew we were in trouble on our bet. My friend and I bet heavy on Wisconsin. When the Rat goes at halftime, how can they have only been called for 3 fouls? We got to take Duke's second half. The Rodent's going to get every call in the second half, and he did. Wisconsin ends up losing the national title in a tremendous coach with Bo Ryan. But John Calipari's teams, from a talent standpoint, generally speaking, 95 to 98% of the time are more talented than the opposition, but they've just not been able to deliver when the chips are down.
I think your list is great. It's Barnes, it's Few, it's Calipari as far as coaches to fade come tournament time. I just wanted to circle back on Self. You know, he lost to Baji, he lost Braun in both first rounders, and here he is back as a 1 seed. I kind of sussed out the math a little bit here, extrapolated. So Coach K is sitting on 1202 as far as wins. That's all time. That's number 1. If Self coaches for 14 more years, he's 60 and averages his wins over the past, whatever it is, 20 plus years, he will catch him. He's going to get to 1,200 wins. That second title, as you mentioned, kind of separates him. 3 is where you start in college hoops to get into that kind of upper echelon as far as Bob Knight with the 3. We mentioned Roy Williams, as you mentioned, all at North Carolina, had a great run at Kansas prior. Dean Smith has got 2, so Self has tied him. Nobody's catching the 10 with Wooden. And Coach K, all-time winningest, and he's got 5 titles.
Yeah, one name you left off the list that's really important to me, and I think is I think he's one of the greatest coaches of all time. I have him in the top 4 is Jim Calhoun. I think what he did
Calhoun's
at Connecticut, taking over he comes in from Northeastern to take over a dormant program at the University of Connecticut. 99, remember they beat that Duke team that Corey Maggette came off the bench, Elton Brand, the Alaskan assassin, Trajan Langdon, led by Khalid Al-Amin and company, and then, of course, the 04 team. And I thought if you watch college basketball closely, that was the UConn-led team, I think, with Emeka Okafor. You know, Okafor gets 2 fouls in the game against Duke, but he sits him. And then in the second half, they come back. That's how good he knew his team was, but not getting that 3rd foul was so important to them. And I thought Calhoun was a tremendous, tremendous coach.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'm glad you brought him up. And Dustin, for closing tabs, you can kind of fact check me here. But if you think of Bill Self and Q rating and Calipari's a much bigger name, correct, Amal?
I would agree with you. And I think part of the thing is, though, Kentucky's a bigger
brand. Let me just finish my thought quickly.
Sorry.
They're both essentially at 790, somewhere in there as far as all-time wins. So Calipari and Self are tied as far as all-time wins.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I think Kansas being in the Midwest sometimes gets a little bit overshadowed. Kentucky being such a and Kansas is a historic program as well. One of the top 5 programs of all time. But to me, when I think of the 2 biggest programs in college basketball history, I think Kentucky and UCLA.
That's not even close.
Yeah.
And Kentucky, when you go to the state of Kentucky, the only thing that matters is Kentucky hoops.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.